and air defenses have been active for well over 20 minutes. And the second one is Iranian media claims the Mirage 2009 fighters, 2000-9 fighters, operated by the UAE were behind the attacks on the Iranian refineries in the Persian Gulf earlier today. We saw Iran retaliate. What the fuck?
So the Israelis continuing the war is something that I think is a bit of like a test case. Same thing with the Iranian demand that the ceasefire should also encompass Lebanon and Gaza. It's a way for them to show solidarity with the Lebanese and the Gazans, but it's also for two other purposes. One is because of recognition that if the war continues over there, the spillover risk is significant that it will come back to Iran at some point. It already has twice in the last 2 years. And since the Iranians are looking for an enduring end to the war, it requires then that the Lebanese and the Gazan theater is also calmed down. But also, I think it is because this is a way for the Iranians to test. Is the United States capable of reigning in Israel? Is it willing to reign in Israel? Because if the United States is not willing or capable of doing this, what is the value of a ceasefire with the United States? If the Israelis can then restart the war whenever they want, and on top of that, they will have the ability to drag the US into the war again. And as a result, this, I think, is going to, they're looking at this to see what the Trump administration will do. Now, of course, from the Israeli standpoint and from the Emirati standpoint, I suspect that they're doing this precisely because they want to ruin the ceasefire. The Israelis were completely against this ceasefire. And I think that if it is true that the Emiratis was behind these attacks, if it is true, then I think it
You think
I find it likely. I find it likely that this could very well be the case. I think we have seen clear messages from the Emirati side that they did not want to see an end to the fight. And this further increases the suspicion that they were lobbying in favor of the war prior to the war. At the end of the day, the Emiratis are a close ally of Israel at this point. This is also causing a significant split within the GCC. You have had GCC states that have worked very, very hard to prevent this war. And now the Emiratis are not only having probably played a role in favor, but also now potentially working to make sure that the ceasefire collapses. Now, this will then, if it is proven that this is the case, I think you will see the Iranians go very hard at the Emirates. I think they have not gone as hard as they probably could, but it will also then potentially lead to a scenario. And this is something that probably the Emiratis are quite worried about. A scenario in which the ceasefire in some ways is in place, in some ways it is not. The United States may simply exit this war, and it will be Israel and the Emirates that will continue it on its own. And that's going to be a very different type of a war, a much tougher equation for both of them. And the United
You mean much tougher invasion for the UAE, not for Iran? How's it a tougher equation with Iran if they're only fighting the UAE?
No, I'm saying that it will be tougher both for Israel and the UAE if they don't have the US on their side. I mean, even the Israeli air defense systems are going to be quite compromised if they don't have active American support. And Trump is going to be in a position in which clearly he wanted to get out of this war. He had realized that this war was a massive mistake. If we're to believe the New York Times account, and a lot of it I can say that is very compatible with what I've been hearing throughout this period, Trump, and I've said it on this show several times, Trump was sold a false perception and idea of what this war would be like by the Israelis, telling him that this would be extremely easy, it would be very quick, and as a result, this would lead to a glorious quick victory for Trump, which clearly was not the case. I think he has now realized that that was all false. He's managed to get himself out of this war. Why would he go back in? What is it militarily that has changed that would make one believe that a second bite at the apple would actually work? At the end of the day, the Iran still have the ability to hold the global economy hostage, and it will continue to do so as long as the geography is what it is. Yeah. So I just have a very hard time seeing that Trump would make such a decision to go back in. And as a result, the ceasefire ultimately may be successful from an American standpoint because it gets the US out of this war, but the rest of the region will still deal with a war that at least initially will be Israel and the UAE, and whether they can sustain that war or not remains to be seen.
That's some crazy stuff you're saying. I agree with it. It's actually, everything makes sense. But like the UAE with an alliance with Israel against Iran, like that's how, if the US could not beat Iran, how does Israel believe it could do it with the UAE or other Gulf countries?
It's a fantastic question. But the first part of it, I think we shouldn't be so surprised at. Look, at the end of the day, the Abraham Accord was an anti-Iran alliance that was being built. It had in many ways already existed behind the scenes, in which there was a convergence between some of the Arab states and Israel against what they saw as a common threat. This now made it public, but it also took it to a completely different level in terms of the military collaboration between the two sides. I always found it to be astonishingly foolish by the UAE. That's not to say that the UAE doesn't have legitimate grievances against Iran or vice versa, but it's because of the fact that the UAE's problems with Iran are far more resolvable than Iran's and Israel's problems with each other. And by essentially going into this arrangement, the UAE attached itself to Israel's problem with Iran, while at the same time being physically much closer to Iran than what Israel is.
That's why it doesn't make sense. Such a dangerous position to take for any Gulf country, to be with a giant that is Iran, to cause Iran is the country you should be at peace at, and Israel is the one you shouldn't worry about. If you want to have clashes with Israel like Turkey, it doesn't matter. Israel's not going to invade you. It's too small to be able to have a ground operation on your territory. So Israel is not the concern. Iran is the concern. So turning Iran into an enemy, striking their refinery when Trump is reaching a peace deal. We're assuming this is true. I posted that.
Exactly.
I find that hard to believe, but why would it?
But keep in mind the messaging coming out.
Iran has lied before.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Go back to some of the first days of the war. Ali Larijani said that the Iranians had killed 500 Americans. There was no evidence for that whatsoever. They had injured a very large number. Perhaps they thought that they had been killed.
The U.S. is striking Iran.
Where is this coming from now?
Just came in now from one of the Telegram groups, waiting for it. Another one of my two Telegram groups sent it.
Well, I mean, if that ends up being the case, that the U.S. is at it, it is attacking again. When there's not going to be any peace talks or any talks in Islamabad, and this would clearly then just cause this attempt at a ceasefire to collapse. Less than 12 hours after it has been struck, and then we'll be back in a much worse situation. Then I think you will see significant escalation on all fronts and significantly higher oil prices and a completely different scenario on the oil markets that will be devastating for everyone, and it will be very damaging to the United States as well, if that is the case. But again, we have to really be very careful. I'm waiting for confirmation.
I'm waiting for confirmation, but I don't know how to make sense of it if it is the US. It made a lot of logical sense for Trump to walk away. It makes no sense. The other option just doesn't make sense, Trita. Why would Trump strike it?
Again, if the American side believes that the Iranians have violated the ceasefire because they retaliated against these attacks that were undertaken either by Israel or by Israel and the Emirates, then again, the U.S. is then choosing to go back into this war, because at least what we know at this point, or at least the information is coming out, is not suggesting that the Iranians started the latest round of attacks. And if they're responding to it and the U.S. nevertheless decides to go back into the war, then I think we have a very, very odd situation. I have to say, I would be very surprised. But then again, we have to keep one thing in mind. A lot of our conversations are based on the idea that folks will make a rational decision. If rational decision-making was actually driving this, we would not be in this war in the first place.
It's fairly clear now that Trump's announcement of a ceasefire and peace negotiations was a farce. That's just an opinion piece, an attempt to drive down global energy costs and reassure global markets. The US and Israel clearly have no intentions of making peace with Iran.
Sorry, who wrote that?
So Iran is claiming it's the US.
Yeah. So, okay, this is very important piece of information in that case. There are elements in Iran who are against the ceasefire, just as they were against the ceasefire in June. This ceasefire has split the decision makers in Iran. I don't know if it's 50-50, but there are elements who believe it shouldn't have been agreed upon, despite the fact that it appears to have been agreed upon on Iran's terms. But there's a fear that it is causing a loss of momentum for the Iranians, and that the United States is not going to honor it anyways. And as a result, it will shift some of the momentum away from Iran, and that the Iranians should have just called Trump's bluff, stuck to their position, and essentially forced not a ceasefire, but a full end to the war from the outset, instead of a ceasefire followed by negotiations. So if you're in that camp, I would take any news coming out of Mer perhaps with a grain of salt, because they may have a self-interest in portraying this as an American attack, even if it wasn't.
What can you tell us about Mer? Do you know much about them? Who are they affiliated to? And are you seeing indications of a power struggle? Because I said that when Iran was striking the Gulf, I'm like, there must be a power struggle within Iran, a collapse in the leadership or something. And that could be factions within Iran that are striking the Gulf nations. And the excuse of the UAE is just a way to kind of justify these attacks, because they also struck Kuwait and Saudi. How does that